Hi, and good evening, everyone. This is our second program, but rather spontaneous because I began to think about this. Our our broadcasts on the weekend, well, the schedule when everybody can hear things and see things is getting a little bit tight. And so I thought that some of us that have these extra things to offer, we will have to use weekdays. And Tuya and I have to be out of town during maybe some of the time that we might offer this again. And so I thought, let's just have some spontaneous meeting and for the future, if a meeting crops up and you cannot attend it, then there will be a video, and the video will be put on Makara, certainly at first. And, that may be the only way because the number of slots in which everybody can hear, if they'll just, wake up at 5 or stay up till midnight, are rapidly, rapidly disappearing. So this is a little bit of a spontaneous continuation where we can, I hope, begin to understand something about why I'm using the language that I'm using and how it does take us into the abstract mind. Basically, these are, ready or not, here we come, is they are monadic studies. And there are different ways of getting into whatever kind of perception or awareness the monad has, and especially in the first two rays, the first or three rays, the kingdom of heaven is taken by storm by the first ray monad, and then there's a great sort of inclusiveness, and the energy of love is used as a springboard for the second ray monad. And I would just say that the third ray, being the acute energy of divine mental perception, acute energy of divine mental perception, it thinks its way into some kind of monadic perception. In a way, of course, the monad is just the beginning. Um, it is the factor, the highest factor in our nature, and it is this monad which makes the great journey on the way of higher evolution. We're told a little bit about it, and maybe if you look at this diagram here that talks about Parabrahm, um, and I don't think it captures by any means the whole thing, but it gives you the idea of constant ascent, and the monad travels to other constellations, first to certain sacred planets for training, then to other constellations, and eventually finds its way into the Pleiades, which is sort of the hub of our wheel. But the Pleiades, really look at it, it's just a tiny little triangle with all of its chakras right there, that green triangle. At least that's the way I interpret it. And there's just so many more places to go as we continue our journey to, well, words fail, but the top of the pyramid, the top of the universe, the most intense point in the universe that we call the universal logos. And all of this may seem very theoretical, and it is, and some of the theory may be proven correct and others proven incorrect, but at least you have to try to think, and reach out into pure reason. My goal is very simple. After all this complexity that I seem to dish up here, the goal is to be able to perceive anything and know it is yourself, yourself in a larger sense. So it's kind of a secondary objective after all. There's a idea coming through a mantram on the secondary, and it says, "Naught is but me. Naught is but me." And after all of this thinking about things, if we can go through our lives, incarnated lives, and instead of perceive, okay, I'm going to use another word here, if we can infusion and perception together, if we can infusive being, then we will know that we are, in a way, the one who self became all things. Now, it's kind of a modest proposal. it's difficult because it's so subtle. But if you're driven to get to the root of things, then that is how you will. That's one of the ways to go, to find that substanding something, which is really being, which is really reality. Now, we can't grok the whole thing. I don't think there's any real accurate perception of the absolute. I think there can be an accurate perception once each universe is over of the absolute deity and its absolute infinitude, articulated or differentiated into, well, it's just inconceivable, all the differentiations and interactions and so forth. One day there can be an accurate perception of that, but we're way down here in a universe. And a universe is just, well, I don't want to make light of it, but, it's compared to the range and extent of reality and absolute infinity, the universe is just the tiniest thing you can imagine. It's just a little infinitesimal, and the scope of consciousness of the universal logos, as vast as it is, compared to what we can understand and perceive, is again the tiniest thing. So we're going to begin to understand something about large and small and magnitudes in general. And, there's some radical thoughts that come out of all of this. And because of those radical thoughts, if they're true, we end up with a very simple definition of reality, and everything else is illusion, even though we might call it a necessary illusion. Why bother with all this, and why not just learn the books? Well, we've got to learn the books because here we are in the midst of illusion, and in a way the whole universe is a kind of illusion, and we have to find our way through and beyond. But all the while, in back of all of this change, all of this variability, is this constant something that we will call, beingness, being, it's just isness. It's just, and when you get to the umpteenth degree of isness, you can't go any farther because it's as intense as it can be. It's utterness, Then we're closing in on what the Tibetan simply calls the one infinite life. One infinite life. He's very simple about it. He doesn't go into all this stuff. But then again, he has his objective, and he's trying to present to us the paradigm for progress in the midst of the illusion of the cosmic physical plane. That's what he's trying to do, and we've got to study that because, after all, that's what we've got to do. And nothing is going to spare us from that. We've done it interminably, universe after universe. At the same time, it's not a bad idea to be reminded of that which never changes, the great boundless immutability. And you wonder how there can be such a no thing. It doesn't mean nothing. It means no thing. It's something, it's a something in a way, but it's no thing that we know of. It's just unparalleled and uncaused, the cause only of itself. So while we're busy sorting out all the many imperfections we have and trying to make them better so that, our relative degree of mastery continues to rise, we're at the same time, and so is everything else, absolutely perfect and infinite forever. And that's a very hard idea to contain, that our essential being is absolutely infinite forever, and absolutely perfect forever, and absolutely complete forever, even while we live in infinitesimal worlds of very relative completeness. So anyway, part of it is language, and maybe if you were attacking this thing in your way, you wouldn't use the kind of language I'm trying to use here. It just seems to be something that comes naturally to me and feels like an old thread, and feels like, feels like philosophy of the ancient days, and like something that I have to take further. So if you're interested in it and it doesn't just, turn your mind inside out, upside down and all the rest, there may be something in it for you. Now, what I'm going to do, gosh, I've got so many things here that it's problematic. Too many things, too many words, all that. But I want to get Tuya's diagrams up here too, because they're somehow the more accurate, And then I want to just have a little alignment with you. And so what we're going to do is we'll talk about some definitions, and you can ask questions or make statements to help clarify your thought. And then we'll have a closing meditation. We'll always have a closing meditation, because it just doesn't do any good to talk a lot about stuff. We can talk a long time, but until we have the real consciousness of that about which we're talking, it's just talk, And then we fall into that third ray foible, love of one's own ideas, and I find myself, in there often. And we're warned, about lots of things that we don't want to go through. So, or stay too long with. So when you check the techniques of integration, you'll see various things. You check the seven ways of the law of repulse. You'll see things that you have to change in your nature, and it'll be oftentimes according to Ray, and your glamours will appear according to Ray. So look, what we're trying to do here is live the relative life with a constant vertical dimension, which is ever improving, and then live at the same time the horizontal life, which realizes that in the deepest possible sense, no improvement is possible at all, because there's been perfection from the beginningless, from beginninglessness onto endlessness. There is absolute perfection, even while there's relative imperfection. And what Master Moria would say, he'd say, look, now, you've got to learn how to contain these apparently opposite thoughts. Can you contain them without, just having to decide on one or the other? Somehow they're both parts of each other. and maybe we can do something to our abstract mind that's going to help us with that. See, now if I was to say, okay, what can we do here? We all have to build the Antakarana, and we can talk about the monastic permanent atom here, as if we know something about it, but really we know very little. I mean, there's very few of us who think in abstract terms, and those who do, seem to forget the love energy, and they get lost along some lines. So we're going to try to learn something about abstract thinking and to apply it so that we can really begin to get into the spiritual triad via the Antakarana, to apply it to our process of elevation. So it may begin with the abstract mind, but the flashes of intuition may come forward, and eventually the will of God in terms of the plan and purpose, God, the planetary logos, may dawn upon us, and we will begin to raise our consciousness into higher levels of contemplation, which again is easily discussed, but when you read From Intellect to Intuition by Alice Bailey, it's one of the best descriptions of what contemplation may be. And so, I really, really advise that, because the different stages of meditation are presented beautifully there. So, finally, this appreciation of oneness is called samadhi, and the higher head center is involved here and so forth. And it's also called a degree of contemplation as well. So we need to really broaden and deepen our consciousness, and that's the purpose of these kinds of studies. And as complex as things may look, they can really be simplified, and we will try to do that, okay, also. Which is not to say we are 100% certain that these things are accurate, but we have to use our speculative, reasonable mind or reasoning mind to get into the intuition which confirms whether something is true or not. So let's just kind of, there's more of you here than I thought would be, because I was so late in just saying, why do we have this, But I'm glad of your presence, Al and Anne and Antoinette and Barbara and Brennan and Bruno and Catherine, Damien, Diana, Francis, Gretchen, Helen, and looks like Joe is here, of course, in one way to help us, of course. Loretta, Lori, Lorraine, Margot, Marissa, Maribel, Michael, Sam, Stephen, Suzanne, Veronique, Victoria, Walter, and Anne Veronica. And over here on the staff side, Michael Stacy is giving us a hand to make sure that at least we have a recording of this for the other people that may not have been able to make it. Now, in terms of when this kind of program will take place, for a little while it's going to be a bit spontaneous. It's when it comes up, okay? And then maybe it'll be possible to find a more regular time or an alternating time that will take in the southern hemisphere and the northern hemisphere on different weeks, or every other 2 weeks, whatever, so that everybody will have a chance to actually participate in the moment, and others will participate through the video. Okay. So let's just enter into a little bit of silence. We try to appreciate that the effect of silence, ultimate effect, is really a kind of synthesis, detecting a synthesis which already exists. Doesn't have to be made, it's there. And the field, seems to unify between us. It's basically a soul field, but what we can also find eventually, or whenever it can happen, is that it's an identity field. I know, funny words, identity field, and it kind of identifies all of us, not just as individuals, extensions of the soul or extensions of our monad, but it identifies us as the same thing or the same being. And then instead of the word unity, we take it a little further and the oneness word comes in. So, we begin to appreciate a very subtle thing, really, because it's not tied to form. It's not about this form looks like that form, or, oh, these are really identical in form. I'll give you an exercise later I passed on before, and it's a real test, and it deals with finding the same in difference. So anyway, we just reaffirm our purpose here is to understand what being is, what isness is. Certainly not the greatest intensity of being or isness. It's just, it's beyond any infinitesimal, which is what we are and even what the universal logos is. But a degree of intensity of appreciated oneness, which will give us the sense of the one behind the many, the one becoming the many. It's a big problem in philosophy, the one and the many. And we'll hold both, the one and the many, and somehow be able to deal with both by being the one and skillfully, according to plan and purpose, handling the many. And we'll just sound a little confirmatory Om, which kind of declares our intention to ourselves and our group intention. Every note has its frequency. I don't know what that note was. I don't think it was a G. I usually like to sound on a G, kind of a second-rate note, but, no, it was an A. An A, tuning the orchestra to an A. It's kind of an indigo note in a way, not just a blue note. Anyway, we'll learn about all these things because the fourth ray is emerging strongly. Well, okay, look, I've been sending you things, and, if there's anybody new here today, I'll get you on the overall list, and the thing to do is to join Identify as Being on yahoogroups.com. Either I can invite you. See, I used to be able to just put you on, but I can't anymore. They changed the rules. So either, you can get on in your own way and just go there and say, okay, I want the identify as being group, and then you make an application, I accept you. And it's a lot easier in terms of receiving mailings. And then, as we go along that way, fewer and fewer people will receive more than one mailing about the same thing. That's what our intention will be. How long will this thing go on? It's always hard to say. I'm writing a book. You're helping me write it, and I'm using the Tibetan's method. Write a little, send it out, discuss it. Write a little, send it out, discuss it. That's how he did it. And he made these lesson sets, and people worked with them, small amount, and then they put them all together and made a book. So that by the time 1960 or 61 came around, all the books were published. And you think about that, that was already 11 or 12 years after Alice Bailey passed on. So, we'll try to define our terms. We'll try to get the feeling of things. We'll try to straighten out the confusions in our mind, because we've got this very limited mind, and we're trying to deal with things that are beyond that self-perception called the universe. It's very theoretical, I admit. But, you got to go where you got to go. Now, let me just, I've got a little glossary here that's kind of in the making. It'll be, as complete as I can make it. And right now it's just the very rudiment of it. There's a much fuller glossary that you can get on Makara, on the book Infinitization of Selfhood, and maybe not all things are defined the way I'm going to define them now, but there's a lot of definition there over which I expended much care. We have to clarify our minds about a few major figures in this kind of infinitistic philosophy. Radical infinitism, kind of goes to the root. I remember reading a book called The Infinite. It was by the name of Moore. And he said, okay, look, here is something for you to consider. When you use the word infinite, there is the mathematical infinite. And about that, many of the more modern mathematicians, Hilbert, Cantor, I just can't even name them. I'm not in that field, but they have expended tremendous thought and their lives on trying to clarify what infinity is. That's the mathematically infinite. But there's also mathematical infinite, but there's also another thing called the philosophical infinite. And that's more about the one being before it's all divided up into endless articulations. When I use a word like articulation, I mean a division. You get into music, if I sing three notes, da da dum, they're hardly articulated. But if I go dum bum bum, you get a staccato over every note, and each note stands out by itself, and that's what we call an articulation. So there's various ways of separating notes from each other in music by different methods of articulation. So when I say the word articulation, I mean basically differentiation. I use the word articulation quite a bit. Well, just to say that the absolute is our friend, the boundless, immutable principle. And when we talk about the word principle, it's the first thing and last thing and only thing and had no cause, and we can't even say it was the cause of itself because it just always was. And that is so different from our thinking about those things that arise in time and space and subside and disappear in time and space. This absoluteness or absolute, basically for me, I use those two terms equivalently, the absolute and absoluteness. I did find my 241 names for the nameless. It's right there in the beginning of the book, Infinitization of Selfhood, and I have it somewhere here, but I'm not going to go looking for it, okay? Some of them are good and some of them maybe need some work, and all of them express the futility of trying to name the nameless. Because the minute you think a thing, you thing it. Think and thing, you know. If you focus and you predicate anything of the absoluteness, you've thinged it. You've made it into a bounded something. And we're going to discuss quite a bit this mystery of boundlessness and boundedness, you know, the ring past not, the non-ring past not, the whole idea of whether there is extension or whether extension is a meaningless term, really, except in illusion. You know, when we look out at the world, things are in space, and this is far and this is near, and this is what we call extension, but maybe it really doesn't exist at all, you know, because you always have to have two to talk about extension, and when we're talking about absoluteness, we just have the indivisible one. It's just never going to be mutated or really divided. There are some mysteries and problems in philosophy connected with that. You know, how does anything come out of it? You know, how does something come out of nothing? But let's be really careful about something and nothing and nothing and nothing. Because the absoluteness, absolute, is not nothing. It's not a cipher. It's not an absence. It's a presence. Um, it's and the no thing doesn't mean that it is not. It is. It's just that it's not filled with forms and states and flows and whatever, any kind of articulation. It's not filled with that. And, you know, that's how we usually identify things, by their boundaries and how things are related to. There's just no relation in that because there's no division. And you can't even say in and you can't even say out. You know, language will, of course, break down, but there's a way of getting closer and closer and closer, and maybe never get there, you know. There will be a time of getting there, because in a way we never left, you know. And I'm just going to have to do a little stream of consciousness here. But there comes a point in the post-universal reality that we call the absolute infinitude. We call post-universal reality and pre-universal reality absolute infinitude. In other words, after a universe, before a universe, it is absolutely infinite. But that absolute infinity, I speculate at this time, still deals with a subject and an object, namely the absolute deity, which mysteriously arose from absoluteness without changing absoluteness. That's the big problem, you know. How did the actor come into being? Well, you know, some things are really easy to say, and I always say it, that when the actor sees itself, when this absolute deity sees itself, the perception of itself is absolute infinity, totally articulated. And there may be also an initial kind of absolute homogeneity as well, before it gets into all of the articulation in its absolutely infinite self. And I kind of comfort myself by saying, well, you know, who are you, and all that. And we try to name that, you know, Ramana Maharshi, who's a great Indian sage, and he called the method of who am I, he called it the Vicharya. And he says this is the fastest way. Just keep on asking yourself, who am I? Who am I? And you'll get there. And, you know, people will think I'm quite crazy, but Like my son the other day said, well, this is the diary of a madman. I said, okay, I think you're correct, but I'll just enjoy it for a little while. Uh, I conceive that every one of us, apparently differentiated, is the absolute. And if we want to reduce our identity and still have it be huge, we are also the absolute deity. And we are also the absolute infinitude, which the absolute deity sees when it looks at itself. In other words, it registers what it is, and that he's the only game in town there. So there's nothing else to look at. He's just got to look at. It's an active introspection, and out of that active introspection comes eventually this absolute infinitude. And I say, yeah, I'm the absolutely infinite, and I have my reasons for thinking so. I'm also the relatively infinitesimal, that tiny little thing. And all infinitesimals are equal. We'll get to that, and that's a surprising event. There's no big or small. Um, but okay, so I am the absolute infinity, and I work on it. And meanwhile, I have all the troubles of a normal extension of a monad, a normal little infinitesimal running around here, just like we all do. And we again have to, in Master Moria's words, we have to contain absolute infinity and the infinitesimal, which we are when projected deeply into matter. We have to contain those two things at the same time. I am both. In the search for oneness, you have to deal with duality. And finally, you deal with no number at all. Blavatsky was great about that. She says there's number and no number. And when it comes to the eternal parent, or, whatever we want to call this nameless thing, it's the realm of no number, which means there's no division. But the minute you get into the absolute deity, which is the actor, and which arises, I don't know how, but cyclically arises out of absoluteness, then there is number. And not only is there number, but there's every variety of number and every variety of infinitude that you can possibly ever have. And they're all actualized. Now, in this little universe here that we've got, you cannot actualize an infinitude. All you can do is see a trend. There's no such thing as an infinite anything except a trend in that direction when you're dealing with a finite universe. But I speculate that in the realm of absolute infinitude or absolute infinity, it's absolutely filled with completed infinitudes. And I'll be working on that, and you'll be working on that. That's where we begin to touch a little bit of mathematics. And see, the difference between the mathematician and what I'm trying to do here is that I speculate that I, you, we, it, the identity, are thoroughly invested in the mathematics that most people consider only numerical manipulations in the mind. I can never leave the self out of it. There's no difference between anything that's happening whatsoever in any realm and the self. The whole thing, whether it's mathematics or physics or whatever it is my story and your story. And there's only one my anyway. It's our story. His story. History, and we get a little hysterical there, but it's our story in our eternal cyclic unfoldment of infinitesimals to balance the absoluteness that we are. And my whole thing there, is that in order to be absolutely infinite, the absolute has to also be infinitesimal and finite at the same time. Now we'll examine more of that premise, but absolute infinity contains its opposite, which is what we are, the little infinitesimal. It can't be absolutely infinite unless it contains as well and generates the infinitesimal. And I'll try to prove that every perception, and every perception is a form, a thing, that everything, every perception is an absolute infinitesimal. I'll try to prove that. And then one day it just goes pop, and there's a return to the all in allness of the absolutely supreme, the absolutely supreme. In this kind of work, you often take an adjective and you make it into a noun. So let's see. I think I've covered some of this. The absolute is the only irreducible reality. It's the only beingness, being. It's in a way a non-entified being. You can't talk about the personality of the absolute because it's every possible state, but it doesn't become identifiably so until it becomes the absolute deity, while not ceasing to be forever the absoluteness. Now there's a little, I kind of use when you have let's say you have a big candle with a wick that never burns out, and you light all these other candles, and they're all lit, and it goes on millions and billions and trillions of candles, all from the one flame. And the one flame never goes out. It always burns. You can blow out all the other candles and the one flame will remain. So we've got the original candle and all of these subsidiary states of lesseningness or whatever, lessness, which are lit from the one. And I think that's going to be kind of a good analogy as to how the absoluteness can be everything else while never ceasing to be itself. So as I say, this is abstract. Obviously, we're trying to use the abstract mind here. And, maybe some people say, you're taking it too far. Just concentrate on controlling your astral body, aligning your personality, touching the soul, building the Antakarana, eventually touching them, these things. And look, I agree, that has to be done. Nobody's going to do that for us. We have to do that and follow the ABCs of occultism at the same time. But if we want to begin to use the abstract mind, I think this is a good way into it. When it comes to, I'll just read a little bit from this glossary. It's not in any great order here. One of the things that I want to say is that the absolute has no consciousness. It has no nothing. It just has, I gotta make up a word here, infinite essentialized beingness. It has a beingness that is so utterly utter that it includes every other possibility without having to articulate those possibilities and make them look different. Oh, consciousness just arose. Oh, intelligence just arose. All that kind of stuff. You don't need it, because the absoluteness is so utterly utter that whatever could be even a divine quality is already contained in the utterly, absolutely infinite, intense beingness of absoluteness. So it's not like the absolute observes itself or does anything. In order to do something, you have to have division. I will only say there is the one mystery, which is the arising. I can only call it the arising, and it arises out of nothing. And it seems to be a habitual law that it does so. Now, Usually in occultism, when you say about law, it's secondary to will. The will of a deity creates certain laws. If you hold that will, the different aspects of that will are laws. So in a way, law does not precede will, it follows it. But there's some kind of rhythm that seems to occur when you measure things from the outside in. And that rhythm gives the possibility of the great breath to exist, ever new universes to come into play, for the absolute infinity to arise in all of its articulatedness, and for the absolute to remain exactly what it is while all of this illusion or partiality is taking place. I'm not saying with language that we can solve this, but let's just say the absolute is not an actor. It's a becomer while remaining exactly what it is forever in an immutable state. Now, when you look, even, DK, he doesn't do a lot with this because he kind of knows where we are in terms of our intelligence, and he just says, look, we have other things to deal with. But if I turn to page 285 in Discipleship of the New Age, and it goes through all of this fantastic stuff, well, God might as well be the absolute deity or maybe the absolute. I'll just read it because it's so fantastic. And then just pay attention to the very last sentence in number 6. God is. The Lord for A stands firm. Being exists alone. Naught else is. Number 2. Time is. Being descends to manifest. Creation is. Time then and form agree. Being and time do not agree. Every one of these is just like this, the seed of all philosophy, he calls it. Number 3, unity is. The one between comes forth and knows both time and God. But time destroys that middle one, and only being is. Well, just think about your causal body, the one between. The sun is somehow, S-O-N, destroyed in the process, and all returns to the Father, including the Mother. Excuse me. Number 4, space is. Think about Immanuel Kant here. Time and space reverberate and veil the one who stands behind. Pure being is. Unknown and unafraid, untouched. There's nothing else to touch it. For A, unchanged. Forever unchanged. Immutable. Even though change is, this is forever unchanged. Number 5. God is. Time, space, the middle one, with form and process go, and yet for A remain. Contradiction? Pure reason then suffices. Let the intuition decide it. Okay. Now, number 6, and this says it. Okay, just want to check something here. Number 6. Being cries forth and says, okay, from some language that can't go into English or whatever, death crumbles all, existence disappears, yet all for A remains untouched, immutably the same. God, the absoluteness, is. I mean, it's just fantastic. Memorize that. I've memorized that. I've forgotten it now, but I'll re-memorize it, And basically, as he tells us, this is the seed of all philosophies. It's older than the stanzas of Xian. You can somehow imagine this in early Atlantean times, and it's a wonderful book, by the way, Discipleship in the New Age, Volume 2. It's a manual on initiation, basically. Okay. So anyway, it's right there. Maybe the words are a little bit different, but the isness of things and the immutable isness, the I, the immutable isness of everything is is there for a. That means forever, forever, and in somehow an uninterrupted way. So it's not like, in my view anyway, it's not like absoluteness turns itself inside out periodically and changes. I say it remains unchanged, though illusion from the very highest to the very lowest arises simultaneously, and every one of those illusions is a great Mahamaya. The Mahamaya of the universe is infinitesimal compared to the supra-universal Mahamaya, the Mahamaya of absolute infinitude, but they're not the absolute, and yet they are. So always we have to be ready for contradiction, apparently, contradiction when it deals with how the mind usually works. And that's why, if we sort of, as some of us have joked, if we lose our mind over these studies, we'll only, I would say, basically lose the limitations of the mind and not not the acute energy of divine mental perception. I'm reminded of the divine Pimander. It's said to have been written by Hermes Trismegistus, the Emerald Tablets and all that. And it sort of begins with the one and only thing. It just starts out, all of what it's going to develop just begins with the only one thing. That's it. Now, if we can get any kind of feeling for the only one thing, if we can look in every direction, register in every direction, whatever sense we use, and at the same time as registering the many, register only the one, then we've made some progress on the path of occultism. Now, when I'm going to be dishing out to you, here's a lot of stuff, and it's going to go on. It's going to go on. And I'm just working on the absolute, and I've got 100 pages here. And, I'm going to work on different major themes. I'm going to work on, identification, for instance. It's a major, major theme, and that's going to be coming up pretty soon. I may not, stick in strict alphabetical order, but we'll use the mind to come at it from various different angles in the hope that clear focus will give us the experience, and I sometimes call it the inperience of what we're talking about, so that our consciousness really does become more subtle, and we don't lose our ability to handle the normal world. Maybe I have, I don't know, but ask my wife. But but the inperience of these high states don't mean that a master can't handle his everyday things, and we have to handle those too, and continue on our improvement on the path in the normal way, as if relativity were not an illusion, which basically we're saying it is. We have to continue that way, all the while deepening our apprehension of the only one thing. And I would like to make a suggestion. I have a couple of things that actually do work. And, I'm saying, well, where do I get this from? Because it comes in, goes out, comes in, goes out. It's not stable in my life yet. And it's not the sight, it's not sound, it's not smell, it's not taste, it's not hearing, it's none of that. Somehow it's the heart center. If, when we approach these subjects, the heart center can be open in a special way, And maybe I'm working on it, thinking about it. The heart and the head center, it leads straight to the monad. The higher heart is the 12-fold monad. It's in some of the healing formulas if you read between the lines. So there's the 12 within the body, the 12 within the head, and the higher 12. Not only 12 upon the plane of soul, and then a still higher 12. There's a lot of 12s in there, and they complete the process. So I just say we're not going to make any progress here if we're just, cogitating or with the mind. The heart has to be open. And I don't know, this is a little bit stream of consciousness. I'll give you a meditation in a little bit here, where basically you can take any two forms, or any three forms, or however many you want, but just, even start with two. And when you finally, after looking at them, after registering them, after dwelling upon them, realize the inherent sameness of them, whatever they look like, doesn't make any difference, then you are arriving. Anything, any two, it doesn't make any difference. There's something lurking there. There's something behind the scenes, which infuception reveals, and then it goes click, and suddenly, whoa, and probably, I would say it's not so much here that you may experience it, but more maybe in the heart. What is that? What is that something that is so utterly different and yet the same as the forms you are perceiving? So this is one of the ways we can work upon making the many into one. But they already are, but at least understanding it, feeling it, experiencing it, if I may say, that we can do that. And, that doesn't mean we lose interest in all these fascinating things that have happened, we've got visitors from other planets. We've got Shambhala filled with representatives from the different planetary logoi, and maybe even from beyond. So we've got, looks like our UFOs are finally getting a little bit of the play they deserve. We've got all kinds of fascinating things going on. We don't remove our attention from those things because we have to deal with them in relativity in order to achieve the divine plan. But at the same time, there's something else as well. And for those people who want to not only perceive but become, or knowingly realize that they are, that's something else which is not other. That's kind of interesting, right? That's something else which is not other than this kind of pursuit may be of value. Look, I never know where I'm going to go. I've got so much here. I don't want to make it tedious for you. I just want to hit some of the main points. And, we have various seed thoughts. When I'm going to get this sort of electronic book together, I guess it'll be an electronic book because I can keep on improving it, I'll put the short things in the beginning. And the short things are something that we can really, grab a hold of and maybe use. And I'll put the longer things as we progress and know more what we're doing. So now I'd like to just say, I'd like to say that the floor, if there's any floor left, is open to your thoughts or questions or clarifications regarding these matters. I'll be the first person to say I certainly don't know it all, and I'm just using a feeble human mind to try to penetrate into realities that maybe we don't normally consider so much. It's a quest. So, we're kind of learning together about all this. So don't be shy, and don't be worried that what is he talking about here? Just if you have uncertainties about things, and maybe it all begins with a big uncertainty, who knows? If you have uncertainties and would like clarification, or you have your own idea about this and that, then just bring it forward and we'll look at it. That's all we can do. And then we'll have a little meditation, not long, but a little meditation. And then tomorrow morning, if you're interested, the Science of Triangles, which we put in the chat box, the link for the Science of Triangles is there, and I think it's our 41st program or something like that, and we'll just continue where we were. Okay, so is there anything that you would like to yeah.
Michael.
Yes.
J.O. has written 3 comments.
Yeah.
The formless life of all lives.
I see that. Yeah, and that's a good way of describing it, the capital L-I-F-E. It's like, DK says we don't know what life is. Well, but in a way, life and being are equivalent. Isness, life, and being. So, okay, that's a good one.
And then the next is manifestation is cyclic, being is infinite.
Meaning of eternal duration. Being, beingness, whatever, isness, whatever, never had a beginning, never had an end. But now here, I'm going to make a point. The finitization of isness is cyclic. In other words, every time a universe appears, what you've got going on is an immense finitization of the absolutely infinite. And that's what we can call, the reduction, the self-reduction of absolute infinity down to the finitude which a universe can be. So that makes sense. Manifestation is indeed cyclic, but what I want to emphasize is that manifestation is a finitization. Manifestation is a finitization. And there's a number of infinite, there's lots of infinite things. Infinite series, infinite this, infinite that, even infinite series of universes, according to the Great Breath. But the general principle is correct, that being, beingness, isness is infinite in scope. And in a way, one more thing, homogeneous. Completely homogenized, completely the same thing, no parts. It's utterly of one, it's indivisible. Okay, what else? Being and life are what?
The third thing written by J.O. Being and life are one and the same things.
I think if we define life correctly, that is correct. Sometimes DK deals with life as if it's vitality, but we'll take the all capitals, okay? And in that case, life is, it depends on how you want to define things. Like I said in one of my letters to you, that Voltaire said, if any man would converse with me, let him define his terms. So that's what we're doing, according to what we make a thing mean, that's how we use it. So I can see, if we think in the right way, that being and life are equivalencies. Now, being is not a being, okay? That's really important, because sometimes we say, well, there's a being there, an entity there. Being is not necessarily entity. We're talking about the broad category of perceptuality, isness. I may repeat things, I have to, just for my own sake, too. The one thing that everything has in common is isness. The only thing that isn't is nothing. And I don't mean the no thing. In other words, the great philosopher Spinoza, he didn't allow negation in God, and I can see why he didn't. And I have a different reason for it too. There's just no nothing, because the minute all things are self-perceptions, and when you're observing the self, there's nothing that's nothing within the self, So I'll try to elaborate on that, but when the absolute deity self-perceives, there's nothing that can be called nothing within it. It's just a convenient use of words. But the actual existence of nothing is confounded by self-perception. I know it seems a difficult kind of idea, but if you look within yourself, let's say all your different parts, and you're going to self-perceive it, show me where you find, as any part of yourself, nothing. So, and all there is the self anyway to be self-perceived. You can't look somewhere else and say, well, over there is nothing, because there is no over there. There's no over there. There's only God. God makes the universe out of itself. Anyway, that's an important concept. I'm not sure I expressed it quite the way I should, but the idea is that the self-perception of the absolutely infinite deity, or the absolute deity, cannot possibly perceive of itself any nothingness. And if it could perceive a nothingness of itself, it would immediately make it into something, because it perceived it. In other words, the minute you perceive anything, you've thinged it. You've made it into something. It becomes a perception, therefore it becomes a thing, therefore it's not nothing. All right, well, and I'll get into it, and I'll try to make it as clear as possible. Okay. Now, here we are.
And Suzanne writes,
Go ahead.
Could this any possible indication the experience of, quote, the heart in the head, unquote, is recognized or possibly utilized?
Right. Okay. Let's get to the Atmic plane. And let's, those who who do the will of God shall know. And let's get to the monadic plane. The head center will be noticed in relation to the spiritual will of Atma, and the monadic plane in relation to the major 12-fold center at the heart of the head center, the heart in the head. Monadic realization, it's a little difficult to say what planet rules that internal 12-foldness, and I think it's Neptune and a little bit of Jupiter and a bit of Vulcan for the jewel in the center of everything. But not until the monadic plane is home is the heart and the head fully able to be used as an organ of perception and action. The other petals and powers of the head center come in with the Atmic plane, and the heart center itself opens up to the Buddhic plane. It's a Buddhic organ, says DK. So we have a ways to go. We're trying to perceive higher and more subtle things, and the bigger, older planets open up later. Some of the younger planets that are very non-sacred, they're cranking along right at the beginning. And it's the same with our lower chakras. Our sacral, our solar plexus, it's going to be right in there quickly, and the spleen and all that. Throat center before long. Heart center late. All those head centers very late in the day. And all you have to do, I think I pointed this out before, but all you have to do is take a look at this. I try to find it, huh? There, that was it. Take a look at how he articulates the planetary schemes. Everything is really articulated within the bounds of the esoteric Saturn, which sort of contains these 7 planetary schemes. but there's nothing, not a hint in the world about Neptune and Uranus. They're just conventionalized drawings with the expected sevenness coming out of one, so what? And everything else in the realm of Saturn, the lesser centers are totally articulated. Well, at least very articulated. So the higher centers come later, and we cannot expect their full unfoldment until late in the day. Interesting, maybe exception to this is the base of the spine center, which comes in very fully at the fifth initiation. So, but you know, it's quite developed. Otherwise, we would not be able to stay on this earth. We wouldn't have the etheric development. Base of the spine, interestingly, it is a crisscross there. Base of the spine goes with the ether, and the sacral center goes with physicality, and that's why the sacral center is not really a sacred center, but the base of the spine in certain ways is. Like DK said, it may be a non-sacred planet. Pluto may be, but it's an esoteric planet. So I guess, yeah, that was kind of the answer to that. Let's see what else we have.
Okay. And Bruno writes, "Hello, Michael. The seven rays are different doors to understand the absolute."
Yeah, you know what I would say, Bruno, about that? DK tells us at some point, even in our normal evolution, the rays become a limitation. Then maybe they appear as a non-limitation a bit later. You know, it's like this crossing of the, where can I do this? You know, when you cross lines, you eradicate the differentiation. Then back in the differentiation, you cross lines again, and you get the non-differentiation and so forth, and on it goes. This absoluteness is all, contains all, but does not show in any articulated form all things, or really, as far as that goes, anything. Now, once you get the absolute deity going, you know, that actor, the actor who arose out of absoluteness, then these differentiations of which we speak, this, among which are the seven rays, or the three major persons of the Trinity, or the Father and Mother, and so forth, 1, 2, 3, 7, 12, 49, who knows, you know, on it goes with these divisions of numbers. Then they can begin to organize the universe. But when it comes to trying to infusive, well, I think, okay, I've got something that I think is important. Look, we know very little right now about the realm of quality, but we're learning because, you know, life, quality, appearance, quality is of the soul, the seven colors, the seven notes, you know, all these septonates are the realm of quality, and we have to study them intensively. Okay, that said, there is something beyond quality. Life is beyond quality. Being, beingness, beiness are all beyond quality, and they are homogeneous and uniform. It's a bit like, you know, you look at white light, and out of that white light comes the seven veils, the seven colors. So we cannot stay in the realm of color and differentiation, as important as it is, and we've got to keep studying it, if we want to understand homogeneous being, which is non-differentiable in its essence. So both curricula have to be studied simultaneously. The curriculum of quality, with all of its coloristic differentiations, and the curriculum of life, being, beingness, beingness, whatever, isness, that has to be not so much studied as felt. I got to use the word feeling here, you know. We come into the immediate experience of isness. We come into the immediate experience of inperience, of what is that pervades everything, and suddenly any two things or three things or 10 things or 100 things are sharing it, and not only sharing it, but are it, and that I am the thing they are. What is that? And so that's a different study, and both are necessary. Yeah, that's all I can say. I think if I was to, first of all, I can't really study the absolute. I cannot really, and I'm using the word really, I cannot really study absolute deity and absolute infinity. I can't do it. But what I can begin to do is study that infinitesimal with its septennate, and it's 2 and it's 3 and it's 7 and it's 12 and it's excuse me, and it's 49 and 343 and all that. I can study that. And I'm on my way, and so are you, and so is everybody, to re-becoming that particular universal infinitesimal we call a universal logos. Now that's kind of the bounded range of meaningful study, and probably DK would say, well, that's even going too far. You can't control your astral body, you know. So you can't behave and get into an ashram. You can't walk into the doors of Shambhala. Why are you talking about the end of the universe? But at least one day it will be possible to re-become this universal logos which sent its emanations forth, its self-reductions, perceptuals. Every one of us is a perceptual self-reduction of universal being, in universe being. We're all, the great being, let's call it the universal logos, decided, I will see now less and less of myself as an act of will. And in seeing deliberately less and less of itself, it created all the myriad of things of different scope. And we are one of those things of different scope, now on our way back to re-becoming the very thing which apparently sent us forth. So both are needed. Both are needed. Study quality and study life. And then, of course, appearance is pretty good, too. Okay.
Okay, and Francis has written, HPB talks about pre-cosmic ideation as part of the absolute. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I don't think it's the absolute that I'm talking about, okay? Because she does talk about absolute in somewhat reduced terms. I think that nothing of any particulate, articulable, differentiable nature goes on within, and that's a misnomer, the absolute. But I will say this, that from absoluteness came the actor, the absolute deity, and within that absolute deity there is tremendous pre-cosmic ideation which precedes the selection of that ring pass not or finitude which must become a universe. So, I'd like to have the opportunity to discuss this with HPB. I see it a little differently, at least according to my definitions. But within the absolute deity, which is, when you say the absolute deity, you're talking about an infinite actor, or what is the infinite being, DK calls it, maybe. Not the absolutely infinite beingness. I differentiate, and this is something relatively new, between action within the absolute, which I think does not happen, and action within the absolute deity and its reflection, absolute infinitude. Their pre-cosmic ideation, which of course is already accounted for in a sense, but it's the only place of freedom as far as I see, that it occurs there in the second step. And if people want to call that the absolute, I'm okay with it, except that it is infinitely articulated, and it is, and I'm working on it, infinitely reduced from absoluteness. So I think it depends on how we define the absolute. Remember, HPB is switching back and forth between saying, okay, this is all about the solar system, and when does she make the leap into pre, not only pre-solar systemic spaces, but pre and post-universal spaces and all that. She veils a lot, and I think it depends on how we define the absolute. I don't see the absolute thinking. No, I do not see that. I see such an intensity, an absolutely infinite intensity of beingness occurring as absoluteness that it covers every possible movement. I find no movement within the absolute except that strange movement of sending forth the absolute deity and maybe subsiding into whatever the homogeneous immutable stage may be. That's the one that needs a lot of work. So I hope I'm a little bit clear about that. I see things a little different than HBB, but it depends on how she defines, well, the absolute. And sometimes you get the picture that just at the top of some of these charts, there's the absolute. And so there are reductions of this term absolute. And I just don't, I try to get as absolute as I can when I'm looking for what I call the real absolute, which involves no movement whatever, not even the great breath. The great breath itself is an illusion, but it is the most necessary illusion, and it arises from a position outside of absoluteness. Now, you can't really have that, but at least there's the perception in an exteriorized world of the absolute deity that there is a great breath and a coming and a going. But as far as I'm concerned, the absolute doesn't even breathe. The absolute just is no motion whatsoever. When I think of what I mean by the absolute, except that one sending forth, which I'm working on it, only the utter otherness. That's what it is for me. I try to explain it the best I can. Right. Okay, Francis, I know can't be exactly a satisfying answer, but because I diverge. And I thought, when I was doing this, I said, oh, shall I diverge from HBB? And I said, well, I'm going to follow where my thought takes me. That's all. And if I'm wrong, then I'm wrong, but I'm going to be honest about it. I'm not going to say, well, HBB said it's got to be that. And even if I differ in my thought about what it is, and I say, well, I'll just acquiesce because you say it's that. No, I'm going to think it all the way through. And when I thought it all the way through, that's what I came up with. And of course, I'm not finished thinking it all the way through. Okay. Best I can do on that.
Okay, then we have Lori,
Right.
who writes, Upanishads state that Brahman is whole and unfolds itself out in the form of the universe, out of its own substance, and as a means of knowing itself. According to your perspective, Brahman here is the same as absolute deity? Question.
Well, it depends. There's also Parabrahman as well, and maybe that's more absoluteness. And as far as knowing itself, I think Brahman has no trouble knowing itself. I think that's a human estimation of why the becoming of universes occurs. I think it's a great creative act. I think, it has something to do with the dictum that you have to be finite in order to be infinite, that there is a necessity of producing that which is the very opposite of oneself in order to be oneself. This is, kind of what I landed on when I thought about why does all this happen. And I also think that, there's really no way for we tiny little human beings to say why this all happens. We really can't do it. But I look at it as a blissful creativity, a dance, a drama. It's some sort of infinite bliss that is involved in this process. So, if we want to say para-Brahman or para-Brahman is absoluteness, but sometimes they don't even differentiate between Brahman and para-Brahman. But we have the opportunity for differentiation here that para-Brahman is the absolute in absoluteness, and Brahman is the absolute deity in action, with a whole choice of absolute infinitude that can be pre-selected according to absolutely free will to create the next non-contiguous universe. I also don't agree with the idea, sometimes advanced in theosophy, that every universe, and there's been an infinitude of them, evolves. I don't believe it at all, because otherwise every universe would be infinite, and it's not, because you couldn't have the great breadth in time, you see. I wonder if that makes sense. In other words, even a tiniest grain of evolution from one universe to another, since every universe is infinitely preceded, would mean you'd have an infinity of improvement for every universe, and every universe would be infinite, which it isn't. So I think that every universe coming forth is its own creative project and is unrelated to every succeeding universe. Now, that's not the way it is inside the cosmos. If I'm a planet, then maybe I'm going to be a better planet, or maybe I'm going to become a sun, or maybe I'm going to become who knows, maybe a galaxy one day. There's a whole hierarchical sense of improvement. I believe there is no improvement in our identity whatsoever in the ultimate sense. We are forever perfect, and in universe relatively imperfect, and that's the game we play in our dance, our what is it? All those wonderful dramas, and it's kind of a fourth rate thing that we unfold ourselves with one hand behind our back. God is not God unless he can create the stone he cannot lift. So goes the old story. So this absolutely infinite being must become finite periodically. And we're in the middle of a dramatic finitude, if I can call it that, which is working out some design chosen by the absolute deity, and which it is his project appearing as the universal logos, his infinitesimalization to work out that design and to have a good time doing it. That's the way it looks to me. So let's see what else. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. Help me to infuse this with infuceptive possibilities. But I think in infuception is really, I think we have to learn how to do it. And it's really very simple. Here's the many, see the one. Here's the many, see the one. But what does it take? You got to get very quiet, very still. You have to open your heart. You have to wait for some. Once I was looking at the range of masters. You know how they have pictures of them, and David Andreas and others, and some of them are authentic and some of them are suggestive of what the master looks like in his physical field. I was just looking at their faces as if they were celebrating some festival. And suddenly I realized in my heart that they're all the same being. Regardless of the distinction between them, they are all the same being. I just realized it. And I want to be, it takes work, I want to be able to look at anything and everything 2 at a time, 3 at a time, 10 at a time, however many at a time, and realize sameness in difference. It's an old approach in Greek philosophy. One day I was driving with my youngest son. All my children have different abilities, and the youngest one is kind of an atheistic philosopher. And I realized, goodness, I'm taking this kid home for Christmas, and we're continuing a conversation that we had 2,500 years ago in Greece. And it was a funny feeling, to go back to the days of Parmenides and Zeno and how they saw things, and realize it's just a continuation, until we get it, till we get it. Okay, so anyway, Laurie, that's about what one hand clap. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of paradoxes there, and someday I heard about a great Buddhist teacher. Now, I don't know what his name was. I should know it because it's like on the tip of my tongue, or you hear it all the time, but I'm not going to have the name, but how did he achieve enlightenment? He saw a fly, the fly, just a fly, and suddenly, pow, enlightenment came. In other words, I suppose, the realization of the unity of all things. Usually enlightenment applies to the third initiation. Satori, the illumination, enlightenment, whatever. See the many as the one. Okay, he saw it. And the minute you hear his name, you'll know who I mean. But I can't think of what it was. But a fly did it. And the slightest little thing can do it. Just the slightest little trigger. And there you are, being that which before you thought you were just seeing. So if you can see it, you are it, see it and be it. I try to boil it all down. Don't think you're different from what you see. Yes, in practical terms, you have to be. Otherwise you get, you put your hand on the stove, you're going to get burned. But there's another level of perception where anything you can see, anything you can perceive, you actually are. And that's what we're going to be working towards. Yeah, a lot of good things said here, and I think Suzanne was saying something here, right? And
Francis followed up by writing, actually, though being adamant about the oneness of the Absolute with the great breath, which is motion and pre-cosmic ideation, at one point in her commentaries she says that the great breath is an attribute that comes in later.
I believe that to be basically correct. I believe that the immutable absolute really, it is boundless. It never changes, really. Illusorily, it changes into something that seems to go out and to go in. And I'll be trying to describe the out and the in of it, going into multiplicity, retracting the multiplicity into a dimensionless point, and then dissolving the point into that which sent it forth. So it does seem to me to be a perception which is undertaken out of absoluteness. In other words, no longer, but in illusion, in the highest form of illusion, this perception of the great breath takes form for me. Motion, I don't see it in the absolute at all. I see absolute continuity. Motion needs parts. I've always said so. There just are no parts. It's the utter otherness. It's the utter homogeneity. I mean, there just can be, for my way of thinking, no motion without division, and there just isn't division in absoluteness. It remains the one, absolutely undivided forever, whatever. But division is possible in the illusion that arises. And there an infinite articulation, absolutely infinite articulation occurs, and who knows how far the division can go. It need never stop, really. But I think that's good. The great breath, there's a time when the great breath isn't breathing, Of course, you might say it's, it's part of a cycle, like 7 eternities, something like that. But There's something that doesn't do anything. It doesn't, it only is what it is in the most infinitely intense degree, such that there can be nothing beyond it that can succeed it. See, like I say, the absolute doesn't precede itself, it doesn't succeed itself. It just is the isness that is forever. And we are that. And if it seems like a big blank, what I tend to believe is that when all is reabsorbed, the absolute, ultimate, indescribable whatever is the state of this no thing. And of course, every one of us being, in a way, an externalization of it via the absolute deity and so forth, we, who don't even exist, tell me what you were doing 5 universes ago, we are in that, and that's all there is. It's just, it's not just like it's asleep. We call it sleep. It's asleep as far as form goes, as far as activity goes, as far as the generation of illusion goes. But it's not really asleep. It's the ultimateness of that, undisturbed. Of course, it's always undisturbed, but undisturbed by that which illusion which comes forth from it initially as the absolute deity and then generates all illusion. Perception is illusion. Perception brings things. The absolute is no number, no perception. It's just the ultimate in beingness. And how to get any further with that, I don't know. We just have to meditate on it and see if we can feel any of its intensity at all. I know it's different from the secret doctrine. I've got to applaud your efforts in working with the secret doctrine and bringing that to many people so they can really think about these things. And every once in a while I just had to be honest with myself and say, look, if I differ with Blavatsky here, okay, I just do. Maybe it's my limitation. Okay, that's fine. But I've got to be honest about it and say wherein the difference lies. And that maybe, I'll come around or whatever, and I'll see it in a different way or her way. But the path of honestly trying to get out of yourself or whatever you've got here what looks like truth is to be followed, even if it leads to error. At least it was an honest attempt. I don't want to just capitulate and say, well, I don't really understand why this is said, but it was said, so it must be true. If I can think into it, I don't want to say that. Okay, let's see what else.
Okay, and to wrap it up before the meditation, Damien writes, "Great talk. My head hurts in a good way. I get it, I think."
I think. Hey, listen, if you find yourself, like Victoria said the other night, find yourself losing your mind, it may not be a bad thing. And I think we have to get used to, look, you might evolve a different language altogether. I've just done what I can do according to what I think. And maybe it's just a load, maybe it's, but I just go with what seems to describe the indescribable or the nearly indescribable the best I can. And then, we can listen to these things and we can zero in on every important concept. Now, and I think I read what some of those important concepts were the other day, but surely identity is one, identification is another, Improvement is another. Relativity versus non-relativity. You know, off the top of my head, certain subjects we have to zero in on. Now, right now, I'm writing this section based on a lot of seed thoughts that I've been writing for years. Try to offer a little bit of an explanation where I can, and it's on absolute, absoluteness, beingness. You know, and every once in a while, I think of a new thing, and then so I know there's no place to put it, but I just put it down, and I'll collect it later and put it where it belongs. But we have to change our consciousness. Now, we can go plane by plane, and we have to in the relative world. And we can also, you know, go with the theologian Paul Tillich and look for the ground of all being. Well, it's a very exaggerated term. We're not going to find the absolute in absoluteness, but we are going to find great beings in whom we live and move and have our being, and we have our being in their being, which is, okay, a reduction of the intensest beingness of the absolute deity or the absolute, but it's still so high that we're going to feel more and more like we are. You know, the life aspect in us is really going to intensify. And I think that's a pretty good curriculum to follow, even while we're learning all the P's and Q's and dotting I's and all the rest. DK is a tremendous scholar, and he's given us more than we can ever absorb. And here and there, he's also hinted at what I'm trying to talk about. And I think he just, you know, felt that he had to concentrate on the greater absorbable structure in order to help the most people. And I hope I'm not being selfish in going off into the stratosphere here, but I never leave the relative world behind. You know, I know that if my emotions get in the way of my thinking, and my thinking is too concrete, and I know if I think a monad is a little dot on the paper, I'm not getting it, okay? So I try to follow everything DK says as meticulously as possible in the world of relativity, and then allow myself speculation about other aspects of what I call reality. And I think it's kind of like life and quality together. And then I don't want to say I'll leave life quality. I'll leave appearance to someone else. I've always been a manifester in certain ways, but never quite enough. And even trying to do these programs is some kind of manifestation. I was taught about manifestation early in my life, because I had to direct operas and produce operas, and there's a certain time, certain schedule, you got to do it. But it all fits together, and it all has to be somewhat balanced. So that's as far as head hurting goes. I had no idea what I was going to talk about, and okay, and that may be the case with regard to most things said. But I will zero in on certain subjects, and I'll send you things as I'm updating them, and I'll try to arrange them with the help of whoever will help me into the simplest to the most complex, so that there's something to be said and for the progression, and keep the subjects tight so that you don't have to look all over the place for the same subject. And maybe some benefit will come over some years. I had to follow a little birdie told me. I had a little inner voice the other day that says, "Start now." Okay, so being obedient type, I did, and that's what we're doing here. The time of no breath at all, no realm at all, the blissless bliss, the one hand clapping, yeah. I mean, we we will not be able to describe it until we are it consciously, but not even consciously. I would just say infinitensively it. That's why I make up these words, because I can't make an ordinary word do what I want it to do. Okay. Anything else? Are we good? All right. So let's have this is just a simple exercise after all this talk. Now, infuception. I wonder if it's a lot like the Jesuit practice of the presence. I mean, God doesn't have to come with all his theological trappings in order to be God. So there's always something else which isn't something else at all. And behind and within and as all forms and all states is something other which is not otherness. It's so intimate that it's hard to register. The only way to register it is to be it. Perceiving it is still a limitation. Infusieving is perceiving and being at the same time. So we've done this before in some other things, but first of all, maybe take any person at all, maybe someone, someone that you don't have at the moment negative emotions for, and just, of course, positive emotions can be just as bad, but let's just say someone, where the energy of love is at least operative. And just, visualize that person. Now, it seems to be a different person, perhaps. But drop your energy into your heart center. And, don't really emphasize the senses as you're regarding this person. But act out of your heart center. And wait until something very other appears. Now that otherness is going to be not really otherness, it seems to be. It's going to be sameness. Sometimes when I want to see sameness, I use the hissing sound, it's very occult. To be as wise as serpents, it seems to evoke infuception, You can repeat it, Something may appear very subtle, and it won't have anything to do with the form at all. It'll just be a sameness that you share with your object of perception, that particular person. Now, whoever you register, it can be someone you love, okay, maybe a little easier. It can be anybody, a stranger, somebody that you really hate even. You just forget about the form, and you evoke through the heart this subtle something. And before long, maybe, given practice and so forth, you're feeling the identicality between whatever you are and whatever that other person really is. Now, it has to be practiced. For a moment, take that person and then put next to that person in your mind's eye another person with very, very different qualities. Maybe not desirable at all. You could almost, I won't suggest this right now, but if you look at a Christ and a Hitler, you could even take the exercise to that level. But we won't do that at first. So take your person and any other person, but maybe quite contrasting in form and in personality and behavior. And do the same, visualize and open your heart through imagination and wait for the subtlest of all things to appear. And it's not about the form. The forms can be very different. But invoke, hoping to evoke, the sameness, however you do it. Or you can use, sometimes that wise serpentine hiss does the job. You may have to sit with it for a while, of course. That even though forms are very different. The identicality will be registered. You'll have to work on it. It's the beginning of the practice of infuception, perceiving no difference, regardless of form, perceiving no difference, regardless of form. May come in, may go out. There may be a more intense realization, fading away to no realization. Just stick with it. And look with your heart for something deeper than the form. Don't get hung up on the form. There's something identical there. Regardless of the form. And when it drops in, you'll know it. So don't push it, just stay with it. You know, you can repeat the words same, same, same. Use your heart. Realize that you're not looking at anything at all. I mean, that, you know, it's not going to be like a form. It's going to be something else which is nothing else. And you know, when you read I think it's the 17th chapter of John, which is, according to the Tibetan, the greatest statement of identification, and it's spoken by the Christ. Reread it and see what he was saying. And we'll just sound just an Om, and then, you know, try to digest a little of what may have stayed with you, you know. Oh. Okay, it's going to be a subtle work. The work is simple in some ways. The thought around it may be a little bit complex, but it will simplify, and we'll keep studying DK the way we should, meticulously. And there will be improvement in the registration of reality. So I want to, tomorrow morning, we have the science of triangles, and It's there from, studying from esoteric astrology. I put it in the chat box. And I'll put you on the list if you're not already on the list. And sign up with Yahoo if you can. It'll send me a notice that you want to join. Identify as being. And I'll, accept you into the group, and it'll be easier than having to, always have me put your name down and so forth. And we'll just persist. And I can't tell you yet. This was just a spontaneous thing, doing this second program. I figured we're going to have a tough time. Tuya and I will be out of town on some occasions, and it's not so easy to get in touch with you. So I thought, well, let's keep the momentum as much as we can. And next week we'll have the Ask program. It'll be the evening program, and we'll go at least, I think, until until Saturday night. Let you know if I'm wrong. And then Sunday we will not have the Attracting Money for Hierarchical Purposes because we'll be traveling. And then next week, the week after that, we'll probably resume on the 5th or the 6th, the Ask program. So, okay. Thank you very much for being here. Appreciate your presence. And I'm sending you, as I write and refine things, work in progress, I'm sending them to you, and you can, dig in. But if you have the definitions for some of the fundamental concepts, then what I say will be easier to assimilate. And who knows, it might be just one sentence that opens the door to a realization that just wasn't there before. Maybe you'll just get it quickly from seeing one thing. And we don't know what it will be. It's always a surprise, It's always a surprise between the words and the real thing. So we'll get this converted. We'll get it up on Makara in wherever we're putting it. Joe, do you know where we are putting it? Or Michael, you know where we're putting it? It should be up there somewhere.
I think BL is putting them onto Makara, and I need to figure out where that is going.
Okay, so it'll be there, and hopefully not hiding like reality is hiding from our normal method of trying to make sense of things. So you can review it if you want, or you can let other people know about it, and we'll just proceed. And we don't know where it's going exactly, but we do know the objective is to resolve the many into the one. It's already resolved. It's just a question of our own realization of it and our own identification as it. Okay? Not just with it, but as it. So thank you for your participation. Lots of love, many blessings, and tomorrow morning doesn't seem too far away, unfortunately, here. But we'll get on with the science of triangles, and all the best. See you then.